So the latest version of changes are here for 2.3. These should be the last changes for Cantarella's kit. So let's talk about what has actually changed and if my opinion on her is the same as it was in my pre-release video. Firstly, what's changed in her actual kit is that her first enhanced skill now counts as using an echo skill. This is nice because you get an additional ability that counts as an echo skill, meaning that not only is it easier for her to gain more Concerto energy through her Abyssal Rebirth passive, which gives Concerto energy after casting an echo skill, but if a future character releases that cares about teammates using echo skills, which likely will happen, she'll be more synergistic with that character. Additionally, the Concerto generated from that passive when using an echo skill was buffed from 5 Concerto to 6 Concerto. That's also nice. More Concerto is always a good thing. The jolt effect triggered from sending an enemy in Hazy Dream and her Resonance Liberation now both count as basic attack damage. And then finally, her intro skill now triggers 3 coordinated attacks, and then there were no multiplier changes. All her abilities still have the same exact scalings. That was untouched entirely. Now moving on to what has changed with her weapon, the base attack was buffed from 412 to 500, which is what it should have been to start with, because it made no sense for her weapon to have a lower base attack than the already other existing weapons with the same amount of crit damage. For example, it has the same exact crit damage stat as Zhezhi's weapon specifically, but it had 412 base attack while Zhezhi's has 500. So it didn't really make sense. It's nice that this weapon now has a higher base attack, which means you will just deal more damage. In order to stack the passive for this weapon, it now also requires a basic attack instead of an echo skill, which makes it just easier to stack, not only for her, but for any future character that would want to use this weapon, so that's nice. And then the 10% Havoc Resignor at 2 stacks is now buffed to 12%. However, it's not only buffs, as the 3rd stack is completely removed, meaning when you swap off of the character using this weapon, they completely lose the buffs. They lose the 40% basic damage bonus and they lose the 12% Havoc Res down, which is pretty bad. Cantarella does damage off field with her coordinated attacks. They won't get the buff from this weapon whatsoever. So this will affect her sub DPS teams, but her hyper carry ones won't be as negatively affected because she is just on field more often. So what does this actually change? Well, even though none of her multipliers were changed specifically, she will still end up dealing more damage now because she has 2 additional abilities that count as basic attack damage, meaning they will get buffed from any basic damage bonus she has, especially if you want to play her as a hyper carry because her personal damage will matter a lot more in those teams. Sanhua's damage amp being able to buff your ult and your jolt damage is really good, and it's nice that they're putting more strength into this specific playstyle for her. It doesn't only buff her hyper carry playstyle though, because even if you play her as a sub DPS, you will still ult, that will still do damage. Overall, it's just really nice. She'll do more damage. Most importantly though, because her intro skill triggers 3 coordinated attacks, she will actually be ahead of Zhezhi, not only in terms of getting stacks for Jinshi's forte, even if only by a small amount, but also her total damage should just be a bit higher than Zhezhi's now, making her a slight upgrade over her for Jinshi specifically. Now I still think Zhezhi is a better character to pull in the current state of the game, as she's not only really good with Jinshi, but she's also the best option with Carlotta, but this may not be the case forever. If you don't already own Zhezhi and you're deciding between getting her on a rerun or Cantarella specifically, there's a high likelihood that Cantarella will have her really synergistic future teammate by the time Zhezhi even gets her rerun. She just got a rerun with Carlotta, so it might be a pretty long time until Zhezhi reruns again. So at that point, Cantarella could very much be a better pull for you, because not only would it improve your Jinshi right now, who probably doesn't really have a very good teammate, you might be using Yinlin or Yanwu, and Cantarella would just be better there, but also that future best in slot teammate for Cantarella would also have been released, and then that's a second team that she's really good in. So currently, while Zhezhi is better in more teams, that will very likely change in the future, so that's something you should consider. I do also want to mention though, obviously you can just get them both. There's no real reason to have to choose between one or the other unless you want to save and you can't afford both. At the end of the day, you need 3 teams for tower, and if Carlotta and Jinshi are 2 of those teams, you'd benefit a lot more from a second skill damage buffer if you already don't have one. Of course, your account might already have Zhezhi and you might already have Brant, which means you have Zhezhi to buff up your Jinshi and you have Brant to buff up your Carlotta. In that case, Cantarella wouldn't really benefit you much, but that's a very specific case that might not apply to everyone. Additionally, you could also just not even play Carlotta, which would then make Cantarella more worth if you care about min-maxing your Jinshi. While if you just don't play Jinshi, then there's not much reason to pull Cantarella, because then you can just get Zhezhi, or you could even get Brant that work very well with Carlotta. And if you play neither of them, well, you better hope that future Havoc character is good if you still want to pull Cantarella, because there's not really much other reason to play her besides her main DPS team, which will be okay as well if you want to do that. Would I recommend it over any of the already existing Havoc DPS carries? No, but is it an unplayable team? Also no. So do what you want. So yeah, these are just a handful of reasons why Cantarella can be a good pull for your account, or why she wouldn't be as good of a pull for your account. A lot of this is pure speculation. Her best in slot teammate could just never release. She could be like Sparkle and HSR, who really never got that teammate to fully let her shine, but even then, she'd still be a fine character. She'd still be okay. Because of her synergy with Jinshi, she'll still at least be the technical best option currently, even if it's not by a large amount. Of course, when Jinshi gets her best in slot teammate, which will likely happen, this won't be the case anymore, but until then, she'll still have her use there. She's actually pretty similar to Brant when you think about it. She's not just a support, she's not just a sub DPS, and she's not just a damage dealer. She can kind of do it all. Now, I still view Brant as a better character because Brant is just simply better at doing all three things, but that doesn't make Cantarella specifically bad or worthless. So while she might not be the best pull for a lot of accounts, she's also not a terrible pull either. She is a bit better than when I talked about her in my pre-release video, and I will also be honest, I was a bit overly negative. I shouldn't have called her mediocre, even if it wasn't an entirely wrong statement, as a lot of people view that word very differently. To some people, mediocre is complete ass, to others it's just okay, it's just decent. It really depends on how you view the word. So I could have said a different word, I could have just called her okay, I could have just called her alright. It definitely was a bad choice of words, my bad on that one. Anyways, to quit all the yapping and to sum it up briefly, she will deal a bit more damage now, and she will be better as a sub DPS for Jinshi. Whether she's a very good pull for you depends on a large factor of things, but if you really like her and you really want her, I think you should pull her. At the end of the day, this is a video game we're playing, and you should try to have fun if you can. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you brick your account if you pull her, or she's completely terrible, when frankly neither of these things are true. And it also doesn't really matter for the majority of players. A lot of people just play for fun and don't give a fuck about meta. Now, while I mostly talk about meta, I also want to acknowledge as well the player base that doesn't. I don't want them to get this idea that they can't pull a character they really like because they just perform worse than other units. This game really isn't that hard, and you can clear with pretty much every character besides maybe Yanwu. If you're a Yanwu main and you really like playing him, I'm sorry, that guy's just fucking ass, but maybe some Giga tryhard can make him work, I don't know. But yeah, in terms of meta, I do not believe she's a top tier character. That's a fine thing. It's okay to have a character be fine, and she will likely get better in the future. That's pretty much my thoughts. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all in the next video.